The year was 1884, deep in the rugged frontier of Arizona Territory, where endless deserts stretched beneath a blazing blue sky and distant mountains stood like silent guardians over the untamed land. Rancher Caleb Turner lived alone on a weathered ranch that had once echoed with laughter and hope. And 2 years earlier, illness had stolen his beloved wife, leaving behind only painful memories and an empty house. Every sunrise found Caleb working from dawn until dusk, repairing broken fences, caring for his horses, and struggling to keep the ranch alive. The harsh frontier offered little comfort, yet he refused to abandon the place that held the last memories of the woman he had loved. Life along the frontier was never easy, and every day demanded strength, patience, and determination. Dust storms swept across the plains without warning, rivers flooded after distant rains, and supplies from the nearest town arrived only after long, dangerous journeys. Many settlers had become suspicious of strangers because survival often depended on trusting the right people. Rumors about Apache families still spread through nearby communities, creating fear where understanding should have existed. Caleb rarely listened to such stories. He believed a person's character was revealed through actions rather than the color of their skin or the tribe they belonged to, though few around him shared that belief. That chilly morning began like countless others. The sun had only started climbing above the rocky hills as Caleb saddled his old chestnut horse and rode toward the northern fence line. Several wooden posts had collapsed after a recent storm, allowing cattle to wander close to the river. Carrying his toolbox and coiled wire, he planned to finish the repairs before the afternoon heat became unbearable. The crisp desert air carried the scent of damp earth, something rare in that dry country, and the distant sound of rushing water suggested the river had grown stronger during the night. Everything appeared peaceful until an unfamiliar cry echoed across the valley. Caleb guided his horse toward the sound and soon spotted a weathered wooden wagon trapped deep in thick mud beside the riverbank. A woman dressed in worn Apache clothing struggled desperately to push one of the wheels, while a small boy tried with all his strength to pull the frightened mule forward. Their efforts only sank the wagon deeper into the muddy ground. The child looked exhausted, his face covered with dust and dried tears, while the woman refused to stop, despite trembling from fatigue. It was immediately clear they had been fighting the stubborn mud for hours, with little hope of freeing themselves alone. Many travelers would have ridden away without stopping. Some feared Apache families, while others simply refused to help anyone who could offer nothing in return. Caleb slowed his horse and observed the scene quietly for a moment before climbing from the... He tied the reins to a nearby tree, removed his gloves, and walked toward the stranded wagon with calm confidence. The woman immediately stepped between him and her son, her tired eyes filled with caution rather than anger. She had learned through painful experience that strangers often brought trouble instead of mercy. Caleb gently raised his empty hands to show he carried no weapon and spoke with respectful kindness. "My name is Caleb," he said softly. "I'm here to help." The woman hesitated before giving a slight nod. "I am Naya," she replied, her voice barely louder than the wind. The little boy remained close to her side, watching every movement Caleb made. Without asking unnecessary questions, Caleb examined the wagon, gathered several sturdy branches, and placed them beneath the buried wheels. Using ropes from his saddle and the strength of his horse, he carefully pulled while Naya encouraged the frightened mule forward. After several difficult attempts, the wagon lurched free from the mud. The little boy smiled for the first time that day, and relief washed across Naya's exhausted face, though her guarded expression never completely disappeared. Seeing their condition, Caleb opened one of his saddlebags and offered fresh water along with a small bundle of bread and dried beef. Naya accepted only after making sure her son drank first. It was obvious they had traveled many miles with very little food. Their clothing showed signs of long hardship, and the wagon carried only a few blankets, cooking pots, and treasured family belongings. Caleb learned they had been searching for a safe place after losing their home during a violent conflict farther west. They had nowhere to go and no one willing to welcome them, yet they continued moving forward because giving up meant certain despair. Caleb knew of an abandoned cabin standing near the edge of his property, a place that had been empty for years after its owner moved away. Though old and weathered, it still offered shelter from the cold desert nights. He offered to guide Naya and her son there until they could decide what to do next. The journey was slow, but as the afternoon sun painted the Arizona hills with shades of gold, they finally reached the quiet cabin surrounded by cottonwood trees. Caleb repaired the broken door, gathered dry firewood, and made certain they would be safe before preparing to leave. As the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains, long shadows stretched across the lonely valley. Naya stood silently beside the cabin, watching Caleb secure the final piece of wood over a broken window. She had seen acts of false kindness before, kindness that always demanded payment no matter how desperate the situation. Looking directly into his eyes, her voice trembled with sorrow as she quietly asked, "Do you want something from me too, rancher?" The heartbreaking question struck Caleb harder than any frontier hardship ever. For several silent moments, he could not answer, realizing that life had taught her to expect cruelty hidden behind every generous act. He simply looked at her with quiet compassion before turning toward his horse, leaving both of them wondering what tomorrow might bring. The following morning, the first rays of sunlight spread across the Arizona desert as Caleb Turner loaded his wagon with food, blankets, lumber, nails, and a few simple tools. He returned to the abandoned cabin without hesitation, determined to make it a place where Naya and her son could live safely. When he arrived, Naya looked surprised to see him again. She had expected that his kindness had ended the previous evening, just as it always had with others she had met. Instead of asking for payment or favors, Caleb quietly unloaded the supplies and immediately began repairing the leaking roof and broken porch. He worked from morning until sunset without complaining, proving through his actions that true generosity expected nothing in return. Over the following weeks, trust slowly replaced fear. Naya no longer watched Caleb with suspicion every time he approached the cabin. She noticed that he always treated her with the same respect he showed anyone else. Wanting to repay his kindness, she offered to help around the ranch. She cared for injured horses with remarkable patience, planted vegetables beside the creek, repaired torn saddle blankets, and gathered medicinal herbs that grew naturally in the surrounding hills. Her young son, Takoda, who had once hidden silently behind his mother, slowly became cheerful again. His laughter echoed across the ranch as he learned to ride gentle horses and help with small chores. For the first time since losing their home, both mother and son began believing that a peaceful future might truly exist. Not everyone welcomed the change. Several neighboring ranchers questioned why Caleb had opened his land to an Apache widow. Some warned him that he was making a mistake, while others repeated old stories filled with fear and prejudice. Caleb refused to listen. He judged people by honesty and hard work, rather than by rumors or traditions. As the weeks passed, those same neighbors began noticing the improvements on the ranch. The horses looked healthier, the vegetable fields flourished despite the dry climate, and every task was completed with care. Naya never complained and never expected special treatment. Her quiet determination slowly challenged the opinions of even the most skeptical settlers, proving that character mattered far more than heritage. Late that summer, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, and an unusually powerful storm swept across the Arizona territory. Fierce winds tore through the valley while heavy rain threatened to flood the river. Panic spread among nearby ranches as frightened cattle scattered in every direction. Having grown up among those rugged lands, Naya recognized the warning signs before anyone else. She knew the river would soon overflow, and that remaining in the lower fields would place both people and livestock in grave danger. Without wasting a moment, she guided Caleb and several neighboring ranches toward higher ground through hidden trails, known only to those familiar with the region. Together they safely moved the horses, cattle, and supplies before the floodwaters swallowed the valley below. When the storm finally passed, many surrounding ranches suffered heavy losses, but Caleb's ranch remained largely unharmed because of Naya's quick thinking and deep knowledge of the land. The dramatic rescue changed everything. The same neighbors who had once doubted Naya now thanked her with sincere respect. They realized that her courage and wisdom had saved not only Caleb's ranch, but also many of their own animals and livelihoods. Invitations soon replaced suspicion, and for the first time since arriving, Naya felt accepted as part of the frontier community instead of being treated as an outsider. Takoda made friends with other children. Laughter returned to the little cabin, and the lonely ranch slowly became a place filled with warmth, purpose, and hope. Standing beneath the wide western sky as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Caleb realized that the greatest treasure the Wild West had ever given him was not land, cattle, or wealth. It was the chance to restore a broken family's faith in humanity. Naya looked at him with peaceful eyes, no longer burdened by fear, knowing she had finally found a place where kindness carried no hidden price, and together they stepped into a future built on trust, respect, and the promise of new beginnings.